Vatican. The first hour, we're going to hit the Vatican and alien disclosure. Tom sent me an email, and based on Donna's response, that's where the interest lies, and we'll, as usual, all gain an infinite new understanding of this amazing research and what we're going to basically be looking forward to in the very short period. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Steve. Great to be back on the show with you guys again. Always my absolute pleasure. It humbles me to get to be with great minds like yourself and to be able to have these conversations concerning the Vatican, the alien connection, what, if anything, it has to do with the arrival of Petrus Romanus. And you're right, and Donna was right. And I would say probably at least 10 to 1, Steve, and we got a lot of follow-up email following that last show that we did when Chris Putnam was on with us, and 10 to 1, it had to be people wanting to know more about the sources that I was citing concerning the Vatican, and of course Donna had to create just kind of a copy and paste email to send to all those people that wanted to go for themselves and read those documents about the Vatican's position on ET and how that might change religion, and we'll be talking about all that tonight. I will give you an update. We heard just today that the books Petrus Romanus are shipping today, so we're hoping by or before the 15th that we will have those in the warehouse, in our local warehouse here in Missouri, as well as the 2 warehouses for the distributor. And this book has already broke all sales records, all previous sales records for our distributor on pre-sales of a book have been broken by this book, Petrus Romanus. And so that illustrates the interest around the world that people have right now, the questions they have, Steve, for the kind of issues that you are brave enough to tackle. The people are there that have the questions, want to know what's going on in the world.
Well, again, Tom, I think this is very telling and truly compelling that years ago, even discussion of aliens would have been relegated and delegated to the realm of deliverance and the rites of exorcism. Now it seems like what is absolutely mind-boggling in the years that you and I have been doing talk radio together, me interviewing you, the thing that's fascinating is the acceleration. Now, you know me, I like to go to the bottom line. Let's start out with the alien disclosure and how that's going to affect mainstream Catholics, because it's already a given that the Vatican has its own intelligence. They have their own telescopes. They know what's going on. They have been briefed. They're clued in. But how will they sell it, Tom Horn, to the faithful who, as I said, would basically consider this stuff of the devil? And, I want to address later, too, Tom, with you, the fact that this good alien, bad alien thing, this is all playing out according to the Luciferians' plan for the ultimate deception. So can we get to that? You mind if we hit it that way first? We'll just deal with the Vatican's entire change of perspective. Go ahead, sir. The floor is
sure.
yours.
And also, if we can, sometime tonight, let's give an update on the David Flynn collection. And I would even like, if possible, to quote some of David's research, because he touched on a lot of this material long before I did. In fact, David touched on a lot of this material long before a lot of us did. And I'd like to be able to honor him by making that point. Well, first of all, let me start out by talking about what's in the headlines this week. You probably have saw one of the headlines was Countdown to Discovery of Alien Life, Tens of Billions of Rocky Planets in Milky Way Habitable Zones. That was from the European Space Agency. And what they're talking about is how their HARPS Planet Finder, interesting name, huh? But their HARPS Planet Finder has proven to them within their own science that they're rocky planets, Earth-like planets, and planets that are not much bigger than Earth and that could host life are way more common in the habitable zones around faint red stars than what we ever believed before. In fact, the international team there in Europe estimates that there are tens of billions of planets just in the Milky Way galaxy, and probably hundreds, or at least 100, just inside the sun's immediate neighborhood. So now the odds of finding sentient, intelligent extraterrestrials just went into the stratosphere. And so now, of course, the scientific teams, the bodies, what they've got to try to determine is if they should try to send signals to some of these planets to make contact. There's some who believe that's not a very good idea. And if they get any kind of response, then in what ways should they maybe follow up with that? Well, on the heels of the European Space Agency's reports, there is a new article that's at Life Science tonight, Life Science, which I think is owned by Reuters. But in any case, it's posted over there tonight. We're going to post it at Raiders News Update tomorrow morning, and it's a feature article that's called "If We Discover Aliens, What's Our Protocol for Making Contact?" And there's some pretty amazing stuff in this article, in the sense that they're saying, first of all, they're saying it's conceivable now, based on these recent discoveries, that humans could very soon come in contact with aliens, and furthermore, that life may even exist on Mars. It may exist on Europa, a moon of Jupiter. Europa, appears to have an underground ocean. And there is an astronomer from Pennsylvania State University by the name of Jacob Misra, who they quote in that article, and he's saying that there could be sentient life living in the underground ocean on Jupiter. So does this sound like the no-mo to anybody but me? And other possibilities he talks about. He says intelligent extraterrestrial beings may have traveled from a distant star system, and they've taken up residence in our solar system. They might, in fact, he says, be living in underground bases on Mars or the moon. Well, as I'm reading this stuff, knowing this is, this is Reuters, this is Life Science, this is not weekly world news, right? It makes me go back to something I was thinking about earlier this year, and that is, what is the real purpose of Curiosity, the rover that houses the Mars Science Laboratory, that's halfway to Mars right now? In fact, Curiosity, I guess this last Sunday, April the 1st, reached a milestone in that it passed the halfway point. It's traveling at something like 10,000 miles an hour to the red planet, but it's going to spend 2 years analyzing Mars around its landing site, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's what we're being told. But then you get these people that are academics, and some of them are members of NASA's astrobiology team, and they come out with statements like that there could be sentient life already on Mars living in underground cabins. I mean, is this guy just a fruitcake? And if so, why is he, the spokesman for Life Science and Reuters News? Well, it's very interesting times that we're living in. And what does this have to do with Petrus Romanus? What does this have to do with the Vatican? I'll tell you something that I haven't talked about this on radio anywhere, Steve. But this, from the beginning, this has been one of the creepiest ideas surrounding the arrival of Petrus Romanus, the false prophet, and any possible connection to the alien agenda. And this came to me when we were doing this research. Was there, related to Malachi Martin's vow, that an occult ritual was performed in 1963 at the Vatican and Target Chapel in South Carolina, involving a woman for the purposes of pregnation, or possibly there was a young priest for the express purpose of instilling something within him or those priests that were there. But the whole purpose of it was to enthrone Lucifer over the Vatican, according to this Jesuit priest. And that all of that was connected in another book by Malachi Martin to a final conclave that would bring to the throne of Peter a pope under the control of Satan, the false prophet. And of course, according to the prophecy of the popes, the final conclave is the one following Benedict, which right now, according to the Vatican's own news sources, the College of Cardinals are preparing right now for the conclave that will elect his successor. But here's the creepy part of this, was in this ritual that Malachi Martin brought up. And if you read his books and his descriptions, there are parts of it that sound almost identical to alien abduction descriptions. You know how that some of the best researchers into the field of alien abduction have often made parallels to dark occultism, right?
Absolutely.
the rituals, the use of blood, the use of genetics, the use of menstrual fluids, the things that they do in occult black magic and in the black mass, and in some of Malachi's descriptions, sounds eerily like some of the same activity that happens in alien abduction phenomenon. And it came to me one day that the Vatican's interest right now in alien intelligence, and if you remember, who was it? Was it Balducci? It was one of the Catholics' own bishops some years ago who said that the Vatican was already in contact. Remember that? Was already interacting. You remember who I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. And you and I spoke of that years ago on the radio. And it's my contention, Tom, just to basically parenthetically insert something into this. Look, they already are in contact. We already have them, not on Mars or the moon. And somebody said, well, you know, Steve, it's not very far if you can make it to the Mars from some exoplanet to jump into the Earth's atmosphere or jump into the Earth's oceans. And Tom, over the years that I have been on talk radio and even before that writing about this stuff, I can't tell you how many people I've personally talked to that have been in the most secret government programs, including Phil Schneider 5 days before he was murdered, a guy by the name of Tex Armstrong who absolutely validated everything that I'd ever been told, and multiple generals and multiple intel agents. But you know what the common thread was in all these guys? They said it was something so not what you'd expect from intergalactic or interplanetary visitors. He said the occult emanations. Even told me about one guy that was present at Dulce, the underground base at Dulce, who was a Christian, and when he saw some of these entities in person now, he rebuked them in Jesus' name under his breath. And listen, a general told me this, active duty, no, you know, friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. And they absolutely, the aliens demanded that no, this is interesting, Christians be present at Dulce when they cut their deal. And Dulce is just one of many alien hives that exist. So, saying all that, what I'm just saying is they're already, to amplify what you've said, look, they're already, they've met with the ambassadors. So the whole plan is, Tom, how do they, number one, as Catholics and as basically the keepers of the faith, how do they leak that into their believers? And obviously there are different Catholics, the old school Catholics versus the new school. So, and this isn't just a Catholic issue. This is a total deception of the whole world issue. So how are they going to do that, in your opinion? Because, look, they've already given us enough stuff. Isn't it amazing? You really think that they didn't know about all those planets that exist? You think they didn't know about Europa and they didn't know about the Martian caverns and all that stuff? We get to David Flynn. I mean, David Flynn wrote the premier piece on Cydonia, and that Jonathan Swift knew about Phobos and Deimos, and even the Russians talking about Phobos being artificial. All these things don't just go back to the invention of science fiction movies. They go back hundreds of years, and in the case we'll talk about later, in all the cave drawings and everything else on the aliens, the alien presence is absolutely astonishing, whether you go to the Australian outback or into Bryce Canyon, Utah, and you've got these petroglyphs, if you will, of guys in spacesuits and helmets, and they're usually 8 or 9 feet tall. So isn't it amazing now? I think what you've laid the best groundwork for, of anybody I've ever interviewed, is how everything, both religious, financial, philosophical, theological, all these points are coming together at this time.
And don't you think that, given what we know, and also, I guess, what we could suspect, that there would be reason to imagine that if, in fact, the Bishop of Rome, who said they were years ago, that they were already involved in contact, interacting with, if you read, again, I'm not going to stay on Malachi Martin, but if you read his books, he was making a very specific case that there was an incarnation that was set to occur that would, in the final conclave, bring about an individual who essentially is not just under the control of Satan. He could even be, in some aspect, not like the Antichrist, but in some reality, kind of a Satan incarnate. In other words, something entirely different about him. And that came back to me when I got to thinking about how the best researchers into alien abduction note these occult rituals. And years ago I did research in which I discovered, first of all, that most of the Vatican's astronomers that are mostly interested, including the newest ones, by the way, that are mostly interested in the alien phenomenon, also are certified exorcists. Isn't that a strange formula?
Absolutely.
The guys who are most called or intrigued or whatever in dealing with demons happen to also be the very ones that want to be astronomers and make contact with this other intelligence. But in any case, I discovered a long time ago that the ancient records, if you go back, you look at the records of the incubus, the succubus, there was always this collecting of human sperm by these night visitors or fluids from women, and they would, depending on whether it was incubus or succubus, they'd use it to impregnate a female host or to have sex with a male host, and how that all of that ancient language is identical in many ways to the testimonies of those who claim contact, and sounds also very much like what Malachi Martin had said. There's another thing that we won't go into, but it has to do with the medieval stories about the devil's mark, and how, according to the ancient beliefs, the devil would mark his victims for identification, and his marks were, scratches on them from a talon, they believed back then. The little straight scars, odd spots, typically in their genitive areas, and same thing today. And what we now call alien abduction, we wouldn't call it the devil's mark, but you have the same kind of marks, the same kind of scratches. So something's been going on for a very long time, and it has an interest in creating. It has an interest in building a body or in altering a human body. And then, of course, the question is for what purposes? Now, the Vatican's astronomers, so to get back on the European Space Agency and the Vatican, they're really excited about these developments, or at least now they can admit their excitement. And I don't know if you know who Daniel Sheehan is. He's a graduate of Harvard Law School. He's a professor of world politics or something at the University of California. But in the 1970s, he's a Jesuit, I think, and he was the general counsel to the United States Jesuit Office of Social Ministry in Washington, D.C. But what's important about him is that not only is he an intellectual, but he was a special consultant to the United States Congressional Research Office project on extraterrestrial intelligence that had been ordered and set up by President Jimmy Carter. I don't know if you recall that, but he was a special consultant to them for the Jesuits. And now, with what the Vatican's been saying, between Jose Funes and all these guys out there talking, he's writing quite a bit, and he's reminding people that it wasn't very long ago, a couple of years ago, when the Vatican actually called together a bunch of academics at the Vatican for consideration of the philosophical and the theological questions posed by the discovery of extraterrestrial life. You remember that? It was, I think, 2009, and the Pontifical Academy of Sciences there in Rome, Italy, they convened this 5-day conference. There was something like 30 world scientists that went there to the summer residence of Pope Benedict XVI's grounds, and they in the Pontifical Astronomical Observatory. I don't remember who all, but it was a conference that was called by the Vatican to ask astronomers and astrobiologists from the United States, France, Britain, Switzerland, Chile, to present to the Vatican's philosophers and theologians, and actually even just a number of the members of the Catholic hierarchy among the College of Cardinals, to have them to present to those members of the Catholic hierarchy what is the mounting evidence of the existence of sentient life on other planets outside of the solar system. Well, now that's what the public understood this meeting was all about. But what Sheehan is saying, and he would know, is that the principal purpose of the conference was to actually indoctrinate, help, adjust, introduce the leaders of the Catholic Church to prepare for the reality of extraterrestrial intelligence, technologically advanced, non-human, sentient civilization that is in the universe that evidently some in the Vatican were aware of, but many others were not. It's protected knowledge, right? You need above security clearance. The Vatican basically introduced what today in the U.S. we call above top secret security clearance. But at the conclusion of that Vatican conference, at the time, the Jesuit director of the Vatican Observatory, Father Jose Gabriel Funes, he convened a press conference, and I remembered it, but I didn't realize the coded language that he was used that has now been brought out by Daniel Sheehan, in which he said publicly, he had a press conference. It was an official press conference at the Vatican, and so whatever he said would be official language. It'd be approved by the Vatican. And he said the questions of life's origin and whether life exists elsewhere in the universe deserves serious attention and offers many philosophical and theological implications. Okay, well, that doesn't sound like much to start with, but that the term theology was raised as a topic that would need to be reconsidered as a result of this new knowledge of extraterrestrial intelligence was consistent with 1 year before that, when he was quoted in the official Vatican newspaper, you know, the what's it called, the El Osservatore or whatever it is, Romano, and he was quoted as saying that if other intelligent beings do exist elsewhere in our universe and they are discovered by us, then they too will have to be considered to be part of God's creation. Well, what Sheehan is saying is that on the face of it, that statement doesn't seem like an important event, but what is unbeknown to most of the non-Catholic world, at least, is that Funes' specific choice of words was a precise restatement, exact wording of a key aspect of the official Catholic Church's edict that was issued in 1277 by Bishop Tempier, the Bishop of Paris, in which the Catholic Church officially condemned St. Thomas Aquinas' theological proposition, I think it's proposition number 34, in which Aquinas had publicly asserted that the first cause, meaning God in Catholic theology, cannot possibly have created other worlds. That was officially condemned by the Catholic Church on the specific grounds that it would set limits on God's creative freedom and the idea that God might have other sentient creatures living in other places. Well, the precise words are those that were deliberately used by Father Funes in 2008. In other words, Funes was sending a specific message that the bulk of the world, guys like me, we would never catch what he had just done. But according to Daniel Sheehan, a Harvard Law School professor who's currently a professor of world politics at the University of California, and more specifically was the United States Jesuit of Office Social Ministry Council who worked with President Jimmy Carter on this subject matter. What he's saying is that Funes was sending a specific message that only Catholic scholars would get. Basically, the time is here. The time has arrived. So is he overstating the facts? I don't know. But to announce this new official policy of the Roman Catholic Church acknowledging the likelihood of the existence of extraterrestrial life elsewhere in the universe in 2009 seems really suspicious to me. The fact that the specific year 1277 Catholic edict that condemned the proposition of Thomas Aquinas that there couldn't be other worlds with intelligent life, that was used by church authorities, I don't know. I think he's right. I think there was something there, and now these words are pointing Catholic leadership to the idea that we've made contact with morally.
I think it's bigger than that, though, Tom. I truly do, because in all of my conversations, and I'm talking 2 decades with people in the know, the whole plan is, and this is what the argument has been: will the Antichrist be a possessed human being, or will it be an alien with claims that they created even Jesus? There was, are you familiar with the term the aviary?
Yes.
Well, you remember their claims is they even have like the equivalent of the DROPA disc, DROPA discs, that would indicate that they have, if you will, their version of a video recording. And so I think it's this: how do they reconcile the God of the Bible and the aliens who are going to claim to be our, if you will, originators? In other words, first cause is, as to a Christian, obviously, and to those of us who believe that God literally spoke the worlds into existence. This was the issue that even Zecharia Sitchin wrestled with. He could never admit that the Anunnaki could be fallen angels or rebellious angels who were created by God with free moral choice, and yet all of his research, a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it, was both historically accurate, uniquely, how should I say this, researched, and you could only draw one conclusion. So how is it that, what is your opinion, Tom, based on what you're studying now? We've got obviously the final pope coming on. We've got the false prophet mentioned in the book of Revelation. We've got the Antichrist, the beast. We've got all these different people. But how are they going to swing, 1.2 billion or however many Catholics there are, to embrace this idea that there's no really, the God of the Bible was just a metaphor for our alien benefactors? I think, panspermia is the order of the day.
Well, that, and also, of course, the world could be shocked into going along with. Imagine, that you've got suddenly an armada of ships as big as the ones in that movie Independence Day that are hovering over the major cities of the world. People are going to quickly turn to the government and to who they consider to be their religious leaders for advice, and they'll pretty much step into lockstep, I believe.
Well, that's the answer. Yeah, that is the answer, in my opinion, and I think that you've brought that up in times past. Now we've seen, you can go on YouTube and you can see all the triangular-shaped aircraft or spacecraft that the Skunk Works has designed. And I want to give you a quote because I think it's so important that people understand this. Lockheed Skunk Works is the U.S. government contractor, big-time defense contractor that's had their secret stuff in the background developing it since Roswell. Reverse engineering alien stuff that's been found all over the world, and I've had special operations guys tell me that the focus and the maximum effort is spent in black projects is acquiring ancient technology and alien technology. So here's a quote. I know you've read this before, but he says, quote, "The former head, Ben Rich of Skunkworks, we already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects and would take an active God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do." Now, this is the guy that was head of the most top secret, most, if you will, alien, when I say alien technology was their forte, reverse engineering it. And interestingly enough, that was he died, I think, at the age of 69, and he died very shortly after coming clean with that. By the way, there's a video on YouTube of that entire speech. So given the fact that you said something critical, Tom, we're going to be shocked into it. YouTube's now showing base ships of horrific size that are basically drawing drawing their energy from the sun. NASA's stopping all of their video footage when anything of, let's say, this extraterrestrial origin shows up. And then we've got the Planet X block out. But all this stuff, here's what I want to say. I want to bring it into what you're talking about. Petrus Romanus, whoever is, and you're going to share that with who you guys think it is, but he's already prepped and knows all this stuff. And if it's so, how should I say this, so time sensitive as you and Chris have put in your book, then I think everybody who's listening to this show worldwide had better get that, because they can actually follow the steps and the thinking then that with every new press release, it's like it's like Tom Horn gets a new key to the mystery. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I mean, and the keys to the mysteries are coming so quickly now that it's almost impossible to keep up with everything that's happening. I mean, just on the one subject alone of what's going on in Rome right now, what's going on at the Vatican. If you watch Raiders News Update, we've hardly had space on the website to include any news other than what's coming out of Rome. And by the way, that includes tomorrow morning as well. There are two of the Vatican's theologians that have come forth now. They've published two different books. One's called The Pope's War. The other is called Obedience and Freedom. They're both in Italian, but you'll see the English story about those books at Raiders News Update tomorrow. And the headline is from Vatican Insider, so it's one of the most well-respected, thoroughly researched agencies that cover news on Rome. And the name of the article is "When the Church Plots Against Itself." And there's a theologian for the church by the name of Matthew Fox. He's a former Dominican. And he says that Pope Benedict XVI is the primary author of a plot against the church to systematically destroy the freedom of the faithful and enslave them to the magisterium. What he's saying is really important, because his point is that both when he was Cardinal Ratzinger and also since he's been the Pope, in these secret, whatever they have, these rulings inside the Vatican where they rule for or against particular kinds of theological positions, he has consistently ruled against the theologians who are in support of changes to the church since the Vatican II Reformation. So again, we're not going to talk about that tonight, but that came up in the first show, that there is something very mysterious involving Vatican II that is involved in what's going on in Rome right now. And now for the first time we find out that, according at least to this one Dominican theologian, that Pope Benedict is right in the middle of ruling against the theologians who are for Vatican II, which means that there is a movement to try to restore some of the pre-Vatican II authoritarianism, and that is very much in line with what many of the Catholic scholars believe is implied by the name Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman, that he will want to restore the original Roman authorities of the Catholic Church, which means the Catholic Church will be the universal church under the empire of Antichrist, and you're part of it or you're probably dead. So that's the implication from it. There's a second priest right now, and his is the one that's called Obedience and Freedom. Anyway, you can read all about it tomorrow. But so there's so much amazing stuff that's coming out of Rome right now, we can hardly keep up with it, and also report other things that I'm very interested in, like transhumanism, eugenics, what's happening in the genetics revolution, what's happening in prophecy in general, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening with changes to the earth. It is a rapid fire. Well, when the Bible says that the time would come when the earth would literally reel to and fro, I mean, I had no idea that it would be such an explosion, such an acceleration, as Daniel said, of knowledge that people would be running to and fro. You can hardly keep up with it. Well, back to the question. That Funes said that that official disclosure of aliens was going to raise theological questions. That brings us to the next question, and that in what way will the Vatican, according to Funes and others, in what way will they suggest that our religious beliefs are going to have to be moderated, and evidently fairly soon, based on the disclosure or the revealing of alien intelligence? And there was something I did, and I invited you to be part of it a couple of years ago, Stephen. I don't remember why, but you couldn't be. But if you recall, in January of 2010, the Royal Society, the National Academy of Sciences out of the United Kingdom, they hosted representatives from NASA, the European Space Agency, the United Nations, the Office of Space Affairs from the United Nations. Anyway, it was their 350th anniversary celebration. And what they chose on their 350th anniversary to discuss was the detection of extraterrestrial life and the consequences for science and society. And if you recall at the time, Lord Martin Rees, who is the president of the Royal Society, but he's also the astronomer royal, he's the one that whispers all the esoteric information into the Queen's ear, he announced that aliens could be staring us in the face in a form that humans are completely unable to recognize. Now, talk about how you could write a book. What was he talking about? And what we did at the time was, we wound up with 20 hours of interviews, and we interviewed everybody from Jesse Marcel to the original investigators of the Roswell event, to theologians, to Chuck Missler, and like I said, I invited you, and I don't recall what it was, but I think you were visiting with your daughter maybe or something in California or something. But in any case, what does he mean? They're staring us in the face in a form that humans are unable to recognize. Now, I asked that question, by the way, of James Hughes, who was the World Transhumanist Association leader. He's now the leader of the IEET, which is the #1 think tank online for the transhumanist community, what he thought it meant. And, he went into all kinds of stuff about, there could be microbial intelligence that we think is dirt, and it's monitoring us. So he went into stuff like that. But what came back to my mind is, what if they're already here? They're already walking among us, and the reason we wouldn't recognize them is because they look exactly like us. Now, that's very strange. Some people would reject that entirely, but I wondered if that wasn't the astronomer royal's way of saying what he, in fact, believed. In any case, out of that whole 350th anniversary, and there was Nick Pope, we interviewed him, but he was also there during the hearings there at the Academy of Science in the UK. They use language like, we have overwhelming evidence, we have unprecedented proof. I mean, all kinds of loaded language like that to suggest how close they believed we were to making disclosure of intelligent alien life. Well, that was only in 2010. It was only 1 year after the Vatican invited all of those scientists, 30 scientists from different countries, to come to the Vatican to explain to their bishops what would be the impact on society, including the religious ideas. You had Simon Conway Morris, who's a professor of evolutionary paleobiology at Cambridge University. He was at the National Academy of Science, and he was the most worried guy there, talking about the unknown unknowns and how it might not be a good thing, and basically repeating something I heard Steve Quayle one time say, that these things might come here and think we look like a pretty good lunch. Stephen Hawking. So anyway, everybody was there, but it also included spokespeople for the Vatican, and once again, Father Jose Gabriel Funes, and he gives this long interview with the Osservatore Romano newspaper, where he's weighing in on the question, are we alone in the universe? And he stated at the time that we are at a time now where there is a certain possibility, in fact, the chances are more likely than not, of intelligent life in the cosmos, and that nation, you remember when he said that notion would not contradict our faith?
Yes.
Again, what does he mean by that? Because definitely there are some people on the earth that the notion of intelligent life that is morally closer to God, morally superior to us, in the sense that they're not fallen and we are, that would definitely tinker with somebody's faith. There's a lot of people on the earth that are Christians, and it absolutely would contradict their faith. So what's he talking about? There is a kind of new faith that is coming, and it responds to the question of whether extraterrestrials would need to be redeemed or whether we would need to be evangelized by them, and that is becoming the common thread amidst much of the new theological discourse that is coming out of the highest levels of the authorities there in Rome that do work at the observatories and speak to the issue of astrobiology. Funes himself said his explanation was God was made man in Jesus to save us, but other intelligent beings may exist, and it's never been said that they would need redemption. In fact, they're in full friendship with their Creator, and by full friendship, he was again repeating how in the Vatican, the theologians now are accepting the possibility that an extraterrestrial species, I want to say exists, they put the word may exist on it, but that it is morally superior to man, closer to God than we are, and that as a consequence, they're coming. And when they come, they're going to evangelize us. In other words, they're going to better instruct us in our faith, and that's the reason why, going back over all these years, you keep hearing that redundant statement from guys like Funes and others from the Vatican who are saying, when disclosure is made, theology is going to have to be reconsidered. I don't know if I ever sent it to you, but 3 or 4, maybe it's been longer than that. I guess it's been maybe 8 or 9 years ago. Time is getting past me now in my old age. But Guy Consolmagno, he wrote his Brother Astronomer, Adventures of a Vatican Scientist, and I think I sent it to you.
Yeah, and we've talked about that over the years. We really addressed that because Cosmologno basically told everybody what was going on, in my opinion.
Well, and then on the last show, and this was what we got so much email on, is the paper that was written this last year by the Interdisciplinary what was published actually in the Interdisciplinary Encyclopedia of Religion and Science, but it was written by Father Giuseppe Tanzella-Nitti, and he's a member of the Pontifical University in Rome, so he's a member of the Vatican's deepest theological discoursers. And he explains in that article how mankind is going to be evangelized during contact with spiritual aliens, and every believer in God needs to prepare for it, he argues, because we are going to greet extraterrestrial civilization evidently pretty soon. We're going to admit they're extraordinarily advanced beyond us, more intelligent, more moral, whatever. And according to him, contact with these non-extraterrestrial intelligences are going to change our understanding between the relationship that we have with God and the whole idea of the gospel and Christianity and creation, and that when they arrive, it is not going to immediately oblige Christians to have to renounce their faith in God, but that very soon the renunciation will come because they're going to present religious content. Now, what does that mean again? You said a moment ago they've got their own Dropa stone. They've got what? Some kind of high-tech type video that depicts Christ. And what's Jesus going to tell us? I'm an alien. These are my brothers. They're here. Who knows what any of that could possibly mean? But what Tanzella-Nitti says is that once the trustworthiness of the information is verified, what does that mean? How could we verify the trustworthiness of information that is brought to us from an extraterrestrial intelligence? Why in the world is a guy who is part of the Pontifical University in Rome talking about this, and why is it being published in the Interdisciplinary Encyclopedia of Religion and Science? We're talking here, folks, about peer-reviewed information, as it were. So these are not Johnny-come-latelys. What in the world is it that they're trying to say? What is it that they're trying to prepare mankind for? In what way could you verify that extraterrestrial information is true or not true? But in any case, he says once it has been verified, then Christians are going to have to reconduct a rereading of the gospel inclusive of the new data, and it's going to change our beliefs about God. So that was, I think I said more about that in the last show than I'm saying right now because I don't want to just repeat a bunch of information, but that was the point on which we got the most email, and Donna had to send that link to a gazillion people out there that could hardly believe that that's the position of the Vatican, but it is. And so how is this more complete ET gospel going to de-emphasize or significantly modify our understanding of salvation through Jesus Christ? I don't know, but he's just one of the spokesmen. There's a former Vatican Observatory Vice Director, Christopher Corbali, and he wrote an article following up on this one called "What If There Were Other Inhabited Worlds?" And he concludes that Jesus simply will not remain the only word of salvation. That's his words. He says that we're going to try. We'll explore the alien. We'll let it be whatever it is without rushing into classification categories. We're not going to be mean to it. So this would very much fall into, I guess, Obama strategy. But then he drops a bombshell, which I printed and put on my board in front of me. And here's what it says. While Christ is the first and the last word, the Alpha and Omega spoken to humanity, he's not necessarily the only word spoke to the universe. For the word spoken to us does not seem to exclude an equivalent word spoken to aliens. They too could have had their Logos event, whatever that event might have been. It does not have to be a repeat death and resurrection. If we allow God more imagination than some religious thinkers seem to have had, he must be talking about Tom Horn and Steve Quayle, for God, as omnipotent, is not restricted to one form of language, the human, end quote. So the language couldn't be more explosive, and it couldn't be more conspiratorial in the purest sense of the word.
I think that people had better realize, too, something. The idea that God created mankind in his image and likeness, the Bible declares that Jesus didn't die for the angels. In the book of Enoch and some of the extra-biblical texts, we see the pleading of the fallen angels, especially those in Tartarus, whether they're the Grigori, G-R-E-G-O-R-I, or the Chalkidri. The thing is, that's fascinating because, again, I tell people this, the idea of mankind was something so astonishingly marvelous that even a third of the angels that rebelled with Lucifer were jealous. In other words, what is man that thou art mindful of him, the psalmist asks. So what I would say, and I would love to get, and I really mean this, get into it with those type of statements is this, truly God is infinite. He's omniscient. He's omnipotent. All the attributes that God is, he is. But he, in his self-revealing mode, has said, this is who my son, and if you read the entire Gospels, you know this, we all know this as Christians, that through him, by him, and in him, Colossians 1:16 and 17, does everything exist or consist that is in existence. So, in other words, the worlds were spoken into existence, but mankind was something so unique that all the angels were commanded not to worship man, but to worship the handiwork of a living God. And about a third of them said, not on your life. And so when you and I, Tom Horn, talk about transhumanism, and it's interesting, in other words, the very argument of transhumanism underscores our response to that, quote, guy that's taking pot shots at us. And the point is to say, look, you can't use circular logic claiming God's omnipotent, all-powerful, and certainly not limited, but if the Lord himself limits his dealings with this specific group of humanity, why are these fallen angels, which are obviously more powerful, all this stuff, why are they so interested in tampering with us sexually? And that's what gets into the fall of the angels, the daughters of men, the whole Genesis 6 thing. And then as you have stated so many times, Tom, and this is all involved in this, that people have got to understand that deception is going to be so great, the arguments are going to be so compelling, the evidence is going to be so demonstrated, and then the power, Jesus himself said, that the evil one will be able to call fire down from heaven. No offense, he just did it in Texas, and nobody, very few people realize that the entire Texas tornado thing, 12, total weather warfare. And again, what's so interesting to me, Tom, is notice this. Notice when you and I first started talking on the radio, a decade or so ago, and what was, they used to boo-hoo us or poo-poo us, I guess more poo-poo, whatever they used to do with it. They used to complain a lot. The idea is now is so much of what we brought out, and we were called crazy, all these different, well, crazy was the nicest stuff, but now people have to deal with the complete, quote, singularity, and I believe the singularity is nothing more than the alien influence. Look, I really do believe that it's not the World Weekly News, but I believe that we already have cohesion and groups working with aliens that look like us, shape-shifting, okay? Even in the Lost Books of Eden, I'll throw something out here that most people don't understand. the lost books of Eden and the writings attributed to Adam. Look, I think some people think that Adam was just some illiterate hick that didn't know how to read or write. If the guy could name every single thing just by nature, Adam was tuned into the mind of God. So instantly, if you would, he shared in the marvelous omnipotence of God as God allowed him to. I mean, if somebody's being created in the image of God, God's not going to say, listen, I limit your IQ to 150 and because I don't want to feel threatened. Saying that is that we've got this marvelous picture of initial creation, the tampering with creation, the redemption, and the soon coming of the Lord to resurrect us. Now, Jesus did say something pretty important. He said, if it were possible, even the elect would be deceived. And I can tell you this, the average, and I'm saying this, the average smug Christian cannot even defend his belief in any attack by, quote, the intellectuals. Now, Stephen Hawking, okay, bright guy. I would like to see literally him get saved and come to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. I'm serious about that. But, now they're just talking about they want to, you put it on your website, they want to basically download Hawking's brain to see what made him tick. And the elements that we're dealing with now, we're talking about, if you will, a data dump on the entire population of the world. We're seeing visual imagery and massive UFO sightings. The coming of Planet X, Nibiru, the 10th planet, Gabriel's fifth. We're seeing the upheavals and everything. And I can just tell you this, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that in the geologic realm, the geologic equivalent of Hegel, the dialectic would be you generate earthquakes, you generate volcanoes, and all of a sudden you just flip your fingers, snap your fingers, and then obviously somebody's turning off what's causing that stuff to happen. And you just wowed most of the planet. So the technology, the singularity, all these things we're talking about, Tom, ultimately, and this is what David Flynn did, and maybe in the next hour, we're just about the top of this hour, we can talk about some of the amazing realities. I talked to Mark, David's twin brother, and I said, Mark, I prayed about the situation. It broke my heart. I'm saddened. It's just the great loss, and I mean a great loss, of one of the most beautiful men that I've ever met in my life, and also, in my opinion, and I know you share this, a man whose mind was really beyond most of our ability. It was his graciousness that brought us into his realm. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I fear God too much to flatter any man. But as Tom will tell you, and I will tell you, there was something so heavenly gifted to that man. And I've heard so many criticisms, and these are my words, and I'm serious, of how should I say this, mentally challenged individuals who could not come up with a basic formula for baby soup or whatever, baby formula, ingredients for baby formula, taking this guy on. And Tom, you brought up a wonderful statement to me on the phone and through emails that he's probably the most ripped off guy that's ever written anything, and people have built entire books never giving him attribution. And it's not that he would have wanted or even cared so much, but it's that they're deriving the wrong they're using his data and coming up with some new age or bizarre thing that he never met. And David stayed true to the scripture. He stayed true to his God. He absolutely loved Jesus. And ladies and gentlemen, I would sit with him for hours, and he would blow my mind, but he was in another dimension. And I believe that the Lord took him home, because at that point, I believe God said, David, your work on earth is done. Come up yonder, or come up hither. And I'm not saying that to rationalize, what is the hard thing about losing a loved one. I'm just telling you, ladies and gentlemen, he was a gift to the church. Newton was considered the father of modern science. There has been nobody like him yet, and yet God in his majesty chose to give David Flynn the understanding of the code that had escaped Newton. Newton was there. He postulated about it. It really bothered him, but it was sealed up, Tom. And now I think the things that you're talking about and you're writing about and we're talking about are those things that Daniel probably saw in Technicolor, but they were sealed up until the time of their introduction. And I think that's why we're on, whatever is the date today, the 4th of April, and we're telling people, because I've noticed this, that when God puts us on, it's usually to have pre-countered some really disturbing information that's going to come out there. And we'll get our flack that we're just, I love it, barbaric, locked in a barbarous religious time. Well, I don't think there's so much about barbarous, but I can tell you this, the future that they're promising, it may be sugar-coated, but it's like swallowing a milkshake with razor blades, that each razor blade then turns on some nanomotor and just devours you from the inside. So saying all that to say is that David talked about what you are talking about now. Obviously, he knew what was coming. And, you know, you want to just address that? We've got about 5 minutes because or we can go into the next hour without even stopping. But I think that people don't understand. You published Temple at the Center of Time. You published some of the most concise and insightful essays, which, by the way, are going to be in his anthology. What, you know, just absolutely, as his publisher, as his friend, and as someone who was equally amazed at his God-given genius, you know, you've got to sometimes shake your head when you see everybody and their dog. And I'm telling you, some of these people that have ripped him off, they should have flea collars and they should repent. But the point is, those are my statements. Don't get mad at Tom for those. The point is that you know, and forgive me, you know that you know, and I know that we were graced with an extraordinary individual given supernatural revelation from the throne. And it's almost like where David left this earth at that point, it was not yet time to go the next step. I'm convinced he knew some stuff, and he was waiting for the right time, and God said, David, it's not time. Come home, you know. That's the only thing I know in my spirit.
Well, you've raised actually several things I'd like to respond to, but let's go to the break, and after the break, if I can have permission to do so, I'd like to respond to a couple of things. David Flynn, but also some of the stuff that you were talking about, some of these mental midgets that are operating at full steam right now, that are highly critical of people like you, me, David Flynn, Chuck Missler, any of the rest of us that are out there trying to open the world's eyes.
Gentlemen, before we take this break, folks, if you're just tuning in, this is episode 622. We've got Steve Quayle and Tom Horn tonight as our special guest. And, gentlemen, I'd like you to give out your contact information and tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, the easiest way to get a hold of me is just a Raiders News Update at gmail.com. The website, of course, is raidersnewsupdate.com.
And, Tom, the new book, Petrus Romanus?
Yeah, Petrus Romanus, The Final Pope is Here. It's, of course, you can get it anywhere, but I want people to know, maybe we'll have a chance to say something about this. On the 24th, or is it the 23rd? Yeah, maybe the 23rd of April, we're going to give away a huge library on DVD. And this is everything from ebooks to audio files to movies to huge libraries, actually, of books. But we made a deal between us and Survivor Mall where we're going to be giving that away free if people buy that book from Survivor Mall. But they can get it anywhere. It'll be in bookstores. It'll be at Amazon. The name's Petrus Romanus. The Final Pope is Here. But know that if you see all that big advertising, and actually there's an ad on the front of Steve Quayle's website right now, too, that's advertising, you click on it, you go to that website. Just know that when you see all of that free material, you're not going to receive that if you buy the book at Amazon. Now, as a publisher, I don't care where you buy it because it's from my distributor anyway. But that one option for the free libraries, that's from Survivor Mall only. That's their deal.
All right, and Steve?
Well, I think, first of all, everyone should take advantage of this because when you buy from Survival Mall, I don't think that you could go out, the average person cannot go out and do what Tom has done or even I've done in the time we've been at it. Look, Tom's been at this a long time. I've been at it. But when you go and order Petrus Romanus from Survivor Mall, you're going to get the audio, video files, and dozens of PDF books. And the point is, I'm telling you, this is a work, how do I say this? It's precept upon precept. We're trying to provide everyone a foundation to understand the eternal ramifications of even seemingly harmless news articles or something says, that's just all that crazy stuff about the Vatican or all that's crazy Tom Horn and Steve Quayle about giants. The bottom line is we're sharing with you the fruit of our labor and investigations because most of you simply cannot do it. So I would encourage everyone to take advantage to that, the giveaway that Tom has offered. I mean, Tom, when you put out just your researcher's library and sent me a copy, by the way, thank you very much, that was something I want to do. Well, I got to tell you something. My drawer of good ideas gets higher and higher. I just don't have the time. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to share something. What Tom has done is given you so much foundation that then the scriptures, as you read them and as God puts his time keys into everything, it's like a combination to a safe. You got to go a little left, a little right, a little left, and finally turn to the right and flip the lever to open it. Most of the safes. The idea is that you have to understand to apply yourself, because and here's the thing: if everyone listening to this show would become more studious and student-like, instead of sitting and I know, Bruce, you have a chat room, and I'm not a fan of those, but you got them, and that's okay. But the point is, asking and I say this to those who has no clue, no understanding, no depth, no history, and no walk or any type of reference point to even discuss this, what he thinks, and somebody says, I think Horn is crazy and Quayle's crazier, well, thank you very much, but that's about as dumb a ad hominem attack as you can get. What we're trying to say is this: apathy, indifference, and just a general I don't care attitude, those are going to kill you. But if you'll just make the effort, and I think that this is such an amazing book, amazing offer. Look, it's critical, it's pertinent, it's time. It doesn't get any plainer than that. Now, saying that, I want everyone to understand something, that Angel Wars plays into this, because the book Angel Wars that I think is just the best presentation of all of the spiritual deception out there. The first part of it, the first half of it, is basically antiquity, myth, legends. The second half is transhumanism, singularity. The whole idea, the simple idea is this: is Satan is promising humanity a judgment-free future, eternal life, eternal pleasure. When your body gets old, you just basically download your subconscious, and then even be going on that, you can share someone else's wonderful sexual experiences for a price. Tom, I remember talking about sex bots over 15 years ago on talk radio. People thought I was crazy. You just posted on Raiders the other day that now they've got artificial skin that can bleed and heal itself. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're in the termination, and where the Terminator wasn't just a movie, and you and I both, Tom, have said over and over and over that the movies are preconditioning you for acceptance, or they initially try and say, oh, that's just that crazy science fiction stuff. Well, when you find out that the Gene Roddenberry of Star Trek fame was an active CIA agent, and you find out how many scripts don't come out of the writer's mind before they come through Langley. And then I just quoted to you Ben Rich's statement. Anything you can imagine they've already done. The idea is this, is that you, in their minds, the elite minds, is you're too dumb to live. And that's the alien idea, too. The egalitarian elitism of an intergalactic, I guess you'd say, predatory pervert that has to come to Earth and seduce Earth women to get their ovum, or to, basically rape men to get their sperm. I think the bottom line is this is not something that's just new to the science fiction genre. This is something that's been around for literally thousands and thousands of years, and then we can't talk about it tonight, but we're dealing with things that the Vatican Library and the secrets of the Vatican, trust me, if you see a National Geographic Secrets of the Vatican, you're not seeing the secrets. It's just like the Smithsonian trying to pass off every giant bone that's ever been found of a giant fallen angel human hybrid as being some dinosaur bone, or when they can't pull that one off, they have to come up with Gigantopithecus, the great ape, but then they can't explain the little people they're just finding in Indonesia and other parts of the world. Well, the idea of this is this: you are being fed selective garbage, I'll use a nice term. You're given regurgitated vomit. You have the choice of hot, medium, and cold vomit, but nevertheless it's vomit in the mainstream. And what we're trying to do tonight is give you the meat. So the book Angel Wars is available only from my site, stevequayle.com.